What's up, everyone? So, this is deviating a little bit from what I wanted to explore initially with AWS. I was wanting to deploy a full stack application via AWS's Amplify service. But with Heroku's announcement recently that they were deprecating the free tier of their services, I decided to make our site a static site. And as a Heroku alternative, we kind of get a little more options if I have just a static site to have some kind of simple deployment. So I actually will be kind of giving a 2-for-1 bonus with this video, where I'm going to pre-bundle our site and have it as static assets and deploy that with AWS's S3 simple storage solution. And we will also deploy it on AWS Amplify, which is what I wanted to do in the first place. So I have gone ahead and started with bundling my exports here. And I do have everything kind of pre-compiled at the moment, which works out really nicely because I will have to upload this. Now, with AWS, there are so many ways we can have our application deployed. Amplify is going to be pretty comparable to everything else we've done thus far, where it's going to have automated, redeployments if we enable that. It's going to support full stack applications. So that's going to be kind of what we're gearing a little more towards. That will come with a little more cost. I think it's still relatively inexpensive. And, I do want to keep the spirit of this video series kind of in mind here. So the thing I wanted to keep in mind was, one, what's easy hosting? And that's Amplify. And two, cheap hosting. And that's going to be S3. S3 is kind of just like a dumb Dropbox, if you will. It's just a dumb folder. And it supports the ability of hosting static sites. So I figured, in the mindset of, okay, well, what are some alternatives we can have for Heroku deployments? If you have just a simple static site, which, yet again, the site we built doesn't really need to be anything beyond that. It's basically just a page. There's no real functionality going. So a static site is perfect, especially if you just have like a portfolio page, something that doesn't really need to be like dynamically fetching or having like interactive components. A static site's a great idea, and that lets you do S3. S3's pricing, you're effectively going to have it for free with a statically hosted website. It's going to be like 2 cents per like gigabyte of storage a month, and our application is going to be like a couple hundred kilobytes. Like, it won't even be a single megabyte, so it won't even be 1/1000th of 2 cents. So that's pretty much just going to round down for free. And you, of course, can incur some costs if you have a substantial amount of traffic. But for something small like a portfolio site, it's likely going to be free as well. So S3, very cheap, but it does require some manual work. You can also use some other AWS services, like I think they have Code Pipeline, which allows you to set up automation rules, and that way you could do some manual setup. It's where you could have your S3 bucket, redeploy everything upon some kind of code changes. And there's so many AWS offerings. It's very kind of, maybe exhausting for a user to look through. They do have service EC2, their Elastic Cloud Compute, which lets you get pretty much a bare metal server if you're a little more comfortable with like on-premise deployments. And that way you would have full control over your application. I like EC2. That's probably, let's see. I really don't use AWS too much, but, EC2 I'll use, and S3 I do use in a couple applications for like if I allow users to upload pictures or media of some kind, I'll store that there. But that's enough blabbering on about my applications. Let's go see what it entails to get something up and running with Amplify. So Amplify, full stack application, like cool, pretty straightforward. It's going to be very similar to what we've done thus far. I'm going to host it. It has a Builder Studio that I've never utilized before, but if you're interested, in more of the DevOps side and aren't really all that comfortable with code, this could be a phenomenal way for you to get practicing with your DevOps skills, and you don't have to worry about too much code. However, we do have our full application available here. So I'll hit get started, GitHub, and just like so many other platforms, I do have my GitHub account linked up, and I can have it pull the application itself from GitHub upon any changes. There we go. And then, I only have my main branch. That's just kind of what I've been pushing everything to for this small demo. I probably could have managed that a little better. Maybe had a branch like main for the full application, and maybe a branch static where I converted the application to being a statically generated site. But, c'est la vie. I do need to adjust some of the build settings here. So it's going to go ahead and define this configuration. Let's see. And instead of just build as our build script, going back to what we did in the previous video, we made that, let's see, what was it? The export script that runs the building and the static generation. So I need to run npm run export. And this is also the output directory that I specified that it goes to, so I need to change that setting as well. So for a static site, if this were a regular Next app, you could leave it exactly as is, because it's going to build up the app itself into that .next folder. However, I do want to make this a static site, and therefore I do have npm run export and _static. Let's save that, and no environment variables are necessary, so that's really it. Just link it up, and let's see, change those two settings. Although really, I guess theoretically I could have just left it as is instead of doing static site generation. But we'll hit save and deploy, and while it is busy doing that, we can go take a look at S3, so we can keep everything kind of asynchronous with our deployments. So with S3, we have our storage units called buckets, and we will create a bucket with which we can deploy our static assets. I'm also doing all of this through just their graphical panels. You can download the AWS command line interface, and you can actually manage all of these deployments through just your command line, which is pretty convenient if you're a heavier terminal user and you enjoy utilizing that. The AWS CLI is really nice to work with, in my opinion. But since the rest of the series is dealing with, graphical deployments, especially since a lot of cloud providers don't have ones nearly as robust as AWS, I'm sticking with this consistency. And like some providers, you do have to have your asset be globally unique across the entire platform. So hopefully nobody else has utilized deploy this as a folder name, but we'll figure it out. You can choose which region, and it's probably going to graphically, it's going to select what's closest to you geographically, but you might want to adjust that as is. Kind of the default for a lot of things, if it doesn't do geographical sort, is going to be choosing US East 1, which is where like every AWS service has a default zone. So whenever there's an outage of like the entire internet where everything goes down for like 2 or 3 hours, it's usually something happening to this AWS region, some kind of networking error that takes down the entire internet. So you might want to just not choose defaults and maybe choose what's closest to you, because that's going to reduce latency, and it might actually save you a little bit of money because it doesn't have to be like duplicated on as many nodes, although I'm not as familiar with that. I would consult the pricing to be sure. We do keep most of the default settings in place. However, usually speaking, if you're creating like a file uploading app, you might want to have your application be the only thing that can communicate with your bucket. For our sake, we are creating a static site. We do need this to be accessible by all of the public. So this checkbox blocks all public access, and that is not what we want. We want to disable blocking all that. So we have to uncheck this, and we have to explicitly acknowledge, like, yes, AWS, I know what I'm doing. I do want this to be accessible because it's a website. Like, we want our website assets to be visible. Otherwise, nobody will be able to view our application. And so we'll do that. Let's see. We'll go ahead and create that. And we do have some settings. So we said that the top level bucket can have that permission, but we also have to go a little more granular and say, like, all files within it must be publicly available as well. So you'll click on your bucket, and I'll have to do a couple more settings here. We'll have to go to properties. Let's see. Here we go. We have to go to static website hosting, change this from disabled to enabled because we have a static site that we need to host. We're not redirecting anything. So we are literally just dumping our pre-built files that I built a moment ago. And it's going to default to our index.html. Our website with Next has the error page has a 404 page, but I mean, my website is completely static. Like, there's no functionality whatsoever there, so there shouldn't be an error incurred at all. So I could really make the error document, my index.html anyway, just route back to the main page. Oh, I guess I actually do have to explicitly define that. Huh. So that makes it a static site. Permissions, we have to come here and let's see. The bucket policy, they have one in their documentation that I need to add here, and that's to explicitly list every individual file within the bucket as public. So they have, let's see. They have some, there we go, setting permissions. I should have pulled this up beforehand, but here's their bucket policy. Here we go. This is going to create public read access for every file within this bucket. Which, yet again, that is very much what we do want, because our website would not be viewable if we didn't have, like, our index.html or linked assets publicly viewable. So everything is now publicly accessible. I will save changes. And let's see. I copied a leading space, so it seems. Oh, and I have to replace it with my resource name, not bucket name here. So my bucket is named deploy this, and that is the resource we are editing. We're wildcarding all of our files. All right, finally. Yeah, there we go. All right, it's going to give us a bunch of red everywhere, because yet again, that is something that you probably will not want in most applications. So it's going to very explicitly be like, hey, are you sure you want this to be viewable by literally everybody? And in our exception case here, it is. We have, yet again, a static site that we want to be publicly available on the internet. So we'll go ahead and do that. And finally, let's upload our files. So I need to come over to my static folder. And just drag these here. And let me click upload. All right, so S3, just general step overview. We created our bucket. We explicitly disabled the blocking of public access, therefore we enabled public access for the bucket itself. We changed its properties so that we could enable the static site feature. We updated its permissions to have every resource within the bucket be publicly readable, and we uploaded them. And for the publicly readable attributes, we have this bucket policy that they do have defined in their guide. So you would want to look for hosting a static website and then setting permissions for website access. And this is the bucket policy that you need to apply. And for that, all you have to do is swap out bucket name with your bucket's name, as that kind of suggests. And so we should have our site live via S3 in a little bit. And, without any sort of automation rules in place, like I said, there's something like AWS's cloud pipeline or pipeline cloud or some service like that where you can set up automation rules with S3. It's not too terrible if you're not updating it live. However, it's probably my least favorite deployment suggestion that we've got thus far, unless this is very, very static information. Otherwise, there are a ton of other different services via AWS. I'm only jumping to S3 and Amplify because they're two pretty common ones. Otherwise, you might want to look at something else. Like I said earlier, EC2 is also a really nice offering if you are familiar with server administration and are not, at all uncomfortable with doing a lot of stuff from scratch. Let's see. Our Amplify site should be up by now, so let's open it up, and yeah, there we go. So here it is with our updates on amplifyapp.com. So we have it up and running on Amplify. And, oh crud, I never remember the S3 URLs or where to find them. It's somewhere here in the permissions. It's going to be like your region dot, site .aws.com or something like that. Maybe info has it. Nope. Here we go. It's under the properties tab at the very bottom. And here we go. We have our site hosted on S3 now. So deploy this.s3 website us.east2.amazonaws.com. So there it is there. And here it is on Amplify. So we have two different ways in which this has been deployed successfully on AWS. And, it's almost exhausting looking through everything that AWS offers. But Amplify, Elastic Beanstalk, App Runner, S3, EC2, there are just so many ways. So if you have any preferred means that you like and you've used AWS before, please feel free to comment that and drop some suggestions. And heck, maybe even if you haven't used it before, if you want me to make a video on it, just let me know, and that may become a future release. So make sure you subscribe just in the event that, we've got some additional topics you want to listen for. So I hope you found that helpful. And if you did, like the video, go ahead and subscribe or comment if you had some additional suggestions. Maybe you have some better suggestions in mind on how you could, automate stuff with AWS for cheap and, efficiently. And we'd love to hear more about it. So until then, I'll see you in the next installment. Catch y'all later.